It's certainly a good looking bike and it's well spec'd too. So how does the Moto Guzzi Stelvio hang together as a total package? Let's take a look. The model you see here in this rather lovely Savannah yellow colour scheme is the PFF Rider Assistance Solution version. Not a name that particularly rolls off the tongue easily, but I guess it's descriptive. Essentially, the only difference between the two models is this rider assistance solution. And that solution brings with it radar, which gives you forward collision detection, blind spot indication, lane change assist, and following cruise control. Everything else about the two models is exactly identical. At the heart of the Stelvio is the 1042cc compact block 90-degree V-twin transverse motor. It produces a peak of 115 horsepower at 8,700 RPM and 105 Newton meters of torque at 6,750 RPM. It maintains that characteristic look and sound that Guzzi fans around the world love, and that little wiggle on startup always makes me smile. It's mated to a 6-speed gearbox with an up and down quick shifter as standard, and the power is delivered to the rear wheel via a shaft drive. The 19-inch front and 17-inch tubeless spoked wheels sport Michelin Anarchy adventure tyres, and suspension is taken care of by 43mm upside down forks with adjustable preload and rebound damping, and the rear shock again with adjustable preload and rebound damping, accessible by a remote adjuster. Both ends offer 170mm of travel. Stopping duties are performed by twin 320mm discs up front, grabbed by Brembo 4-piston monoblock calipers, and a single 280mm disc with a Brembo 2-piston caliper at the rear. So let's finish off this part with some numbers. The bike's curb weight is 246 kilos. It has a 21 litre fuel tank, and the seat height is, for this type of bike, a pretty manageable 830mm. To give you some context, I'm 5'10" or 178 centimetres with a 32-inch inside leg, and I can flat foot this bike pretty easily. The narrow seat at the front here certainly helps with that, a very manageable size. I'll take a look at the TFT screen, the rider modes and all that sort of stuff during the riding section, so let's just crack on with that now. Okay, so a familiar starting point for my videos, and I think the first thing to talk about on this bike is the comfort and the ergonomics. As I mentioned, you've got that nice little shake on startup, and with the shaft drive, as ever on this bike, you get a clunk and a bit of a surge when you put it into gear. Now, when I first jumped on this after riding the Africa Twin up to collect it, it felt very different, very much lower at the front. It felt a little bit more stretched out, lower bars, and I guess essentially we've got a Mandello V100 underneath this adventure clothing. Obviously there's other changes to that. The head angle is kind of relatively slack. You've got a big sweep back on the bars, but that does mean that the bars are in a nice position. You're not having to reach for them, and the seat, which I've already shown you at 830mm, is a nice height, and that means moving the bike around when seated on it is relatively easy. It is still a bit of a lump though at 246 kilograms fully fueled. The overall kind of foot, hand, bum triangle is good. It's a nice place to be. So as well as being relatively low, the seat is very comfortable as well. I spent probably 3 hours on the way home. I took a cross-country route to avoid the motorway. I stopped admittedly for a cup of coffee, but I had no issues in terms of comfort. It does certainly feel like a bike that's been set up to ride all day in comfort, and that takes me back to my other point about me saying that this is definitely on the adventure touring side of adventure. The creature comforts on the bike are pretty good as well. We've got an up and down quick shifter, and that has worked really nicely, no issues with that at all. The TFT screen is really nice and clear, and it's really easy to operate. More on that later on. You've got cruise control, and obviously on this model you've got radar controlled cruise control. You've got a nice bar there for mounting sat navs or whatever you want to fit on there, and actually that's something that a lot of manufacturers don't bother with. I'd really like to have had one of those on the Africa Twin, arguably because it's got a CarPlay they would argue you don't need it, but it gives you that extra option, which is good. And one thing that this bike does have is an electronically adjustable screen, and the screen does give you a pretty decent coverage. You might be able to hear I've got a little bit of wind noise and I can feel it on the shoulders, but outside of that, that screen and the deflectors do a pretty good job. The pegs are more road focused, quite narrow with a rubber grip on them. For standing, I'd want a bit of a bigger platform, and the thing I notice when I do stand is that those bars seem quite low, but I don't think this bike is going to see much more than some gravel trails and a few fields to get to your campsite. Now for me, the one glowing omission on this bike, given it is an adventure style bike, the lack of heated grips as standard. There's a lot of bikes that don't come with them as standard, but when you kind of think of what this bike is designed for and how much that has an impact onto the asking price of the bike, it's the sort of thing that would be nice to see. The controls are really easy to move, actually very reminiscent of KTM controls with the 4 buttons and almost exactly the same cruise control switch on there. So you've got a button on the left where you can change your menu that you're in. If you scroll to the right, probably can't see it on the screen, I'll show it in a cutaway, but we've got menu A, menu B, and then your screen control, and then with it's on the screen control, so you can put that up and down. If we put that into A, then up and down scrolls through your control. So we've got the odometer, we've got the trip at the time that trip has been taken to ride, the max speed, which as you can see there's 137 miles an hour. And I would like to point out to Moto Guzzi, then the average speed over that trip, the average fuel consumption 44.9, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, what the current fuel is. And then you've got the traction control settings on there, which goes from 1 to 4, and again you can just click right to go into that and change it up and down. On the right hand control you've got your mode buttons, press that and we're in tour mode, press it again, we're in rain, off-road, sport, and then back to road. So those are your modes, but then you can go into each of those 4 modes and change all the parameters within that. So instead of adding a sort of a custom mode, as a lot of manufacturers do, on this they allow you to actually go in and change those modes. Whilst I'm here, I'll talk a little bit about the PFF options that this bike has got. So obviously we've got radar, so we've got blind spot detection, we've got a collision warning or forward collision warning, we've also got lane assist, so if you're indicated to turn, somebody's there, the blind spot mirror will flash at you to say don't do it. And obviously we've got radar cruise control, which is becoming more and more common on bikes. Certainly I think if you are in poor weather and you're commuting or you're riding on motorways, or just having that extra safety feature there, I think it is good. Whether you'd want to pay the extra £700 to get the radar cruise control and all the other bits and pieces, that's down to you. So now on to the engine, and that very characterful V-twin. It is definitely a case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. From Moto Guzzi, it's a signature of theirs. It's very flexible. It'll pick up from low revs really nicely. It's got quite a nice bit of punch to it. Not a wrist snapping kind of surge of power. It's a nice kind of linear delivery. The throttle's nice and direct. It's not snatchy at all. The ride-by-wire throttle has been done really well, and it sounds lovely too. When you ride it more aggressively, you get sort of a few crackles on the overrun as well as you're going down the gearbox. Speaking of which, the gearbox seems to be nice. We talked about that kind of characteristic clunk when you put it into first gear, but the quick shifter that comes as standard is smooth up and down, and that engine character very much supports the chassis and the way this bike rides. As I've already said, I feel it's more of a adventure touring, more of a road biased, and I think that is evident when you start getting into the twisties. It's a lovely sounding thing as well. Nice bit of induction roar from it. The bike feels nice and planted, the suspension gives good feedback, slightly on the firm side, or obviously you can kind of speed up or slow down the damping levels or change the preload. But on the mix of roads that I've ridden, be that motorway, lumpy bumpy country roads, it's been good. It doesn't get unsettled, you know exactly what's going on with the bike. It does make for a really engaging ride, and obviously the bike's overall kind of feel of being flat and low adds to that. So I've done a mix of roads like this. I've done some smaller country lanes, I've done A roads and motorways, and it has performed admirably in all of those scenarios. The one thing I haven't done really very much of is off-road. Again, given this bike's 170 millimeters of travel and sort of low ground clearance, you're not going to be venturing into anything too technical. And I have to admit as well that the Anarchy adventure tyres that are on here, I think are going to struggle in anything more than gravel. I've been having a look at places that I can ride, and unfortunately a lot of the byways near me are really boggy and horrible, and given my leg is still not 100% yet, and I'm trying to keep off of off-road for the time being in case I have to dab my foot or get myself into trouble and have to rely on a leg which isn't 100%, kind of stayed away from that stuff.
But as it's for you guys, I decided to put that to one side a little bit and found somewhere where I could give you just a flavour of off-road.
Now it's interesting how adventure bikes get portrayed. Let's just put this into off-road. There we go. All of the marketing shows them crossing the Atlas Mountains and broad deserts and all that sort of stuff. And in reality, they don't get used for that very often. And also in the comment sections in the videos, there's a certain group of people that seem to think because it's called an adventure bike, it has to be able to be ridden like an enduro bike. And that's not the case. Adventure bikes are a very broad brush. I've seen Paul Torres taking a T7 to places that I could hardly walk. Same with Tony Boa and Africa Twin. But I think this is kind of really the off-road that this bike is aimed at. Being able to traverse some of those gravel trails in comfort, and as such this is the perfect vehicle for that. Pheasants to deal with. This bike obviously can be taken to much wilder places than this, but given I'm not 100% recovered, I don't want to start trying to take a big heavy bike like this to places where I'm going to get into trouble on my own. This is actually a beautiful little lane at this time of year when you get that leaf cover on the ground. As far as the average buyer of this bike, I think that's largely all they're going to want this bike for. I'm limited obviously in the type of terrain I can ride in, given where I live. This has been a thoroughly enjoyable bike to ride. I really do like it. And coming out on a lovely autumn day like this kind of weather, it's absolutely fantastic on some of my favourite roads. Something I forgot to mention when I was talking about the ergonomics, you've got adjustable brake and clutch levers, and you've got a USB-A connector there. Now the engine, as I said, is powerful. 115 horsepower is pretty good. It's flexible, but the one thing that is a little bit disappointing on it is the fuel consumption. It's not horrible by any means, but on a kind of mixed roads that I've been riding, I've averaged on that last 100 odd mile trip 45 to 46 miles per gallon. You know, when you look at something like my Africa Twin is kind of up in the low to mid 50s. My 790 Adventure was 60s into 70s on long runs, and that's something I'll watch as the more I ride it and see if it's still just calculating whoever had it before and took it up to 137 miles an hour. We're probably riding it slightly more aggressively than I have been. As I've already mentioned, the Stelvio I think is a bike that definitely sits on the adventure touring side of the fence. Yes, you can ride it off-road, of course, but this is a bike that is much more at home, I think, carving the twisties, and it does that very, very well. I found very little about this bike to dislike. It's very comfortable. You can spend all day on it with no problems at all. The TFT display is very easy to read and easy to operate, and overall it is a very enjoyable bike to ride. The standard model, which is available in 2 colours, will empty your bank account to the tune of £14,850. If you want the additional safety features that the PFF solution brings, then you'll need to add £700 to that, and this bike, as you see it here, retails at £15,550. In a sea of adventure bikes, if you're looking for something a bit different and something to stand out on, then the Moto Guzzi Stelvio certainly offers that. If you've got any questions about the bike, then let me know in the comment section down below. And as usual, all that leaves me to say is until next time, thanks for watching, take care, ride safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.